In this session, I wanted to continue the discussion of using SageMaker pipelines for MLOps workflows. So this is largely going to be using a lot of the native AWS or native SageMaker components. And in the prior session, I was explaining this diagram where you're taking your input data, processing it, so that's splitting it up into multiple data sets for train test validation. Then you're running a training job, which will accept your data and then train a new machine learning model. Your machine learning model will then be output as a compressed file into S3. Then once you've got that, you've got your trained model, then you can load that up into a SageMaker evaluation job. Then you also can bring your test data through, evaluate it, the results also get saved to S3 again. And then your results go through a conditional statement or an assessment versus some sort of threshold value. In this example, they were using a MSE value of 6. If it's under that, then the model gets registered in the SageMaker model registry. Okay, so in this session, I was just going to pretty much fly through some of the code. So as I said, eventually you might come across some of this code, but you might actually just see this code itself when you spin up a new project versus actually seeing this complete repository. Anyway, so this notebook, this IPYNB file is a notebook file, and it's just like a Jupyter notebook file that would go through the whole process of setting up the SageMaker pipeline, and then at the end it just goes through and runs the whole process start to finish. Okay, so I'll just quickly go through this. First bit is just checking the SageMaker version, then checking the Python version, then installing the latest SageMaker version. And for these two statements, if you want to actually run them, because these actually won't run, if you do want to run them, just change it to true and change it to true here, and those commands will run. Then here it's just installing Boto 3 to talk to AWS services, bringing in the SageMaker SDK. This one is just for convenience, you can ignore, and then bring in the JSON library to parse and generate JSON objects. And then here, first thing is creating a connection to SageMaker and then creating a connection to SSM. So SSM is just a place where there are environment variables. So what this is going to be built on, it's going to be built on the SageMaker platform, specifically a SageMaker Studio platform. And there's actually one SageMaker Studio platform per AWS account. And then we're going to need that and plus any environment variables for this account. So things like network information, so subnets and security groups, those probably are included in the SSM details. Okay, so this is a function that is just there to retrieve parameters about the environment itself. And then we scroll down. Okay, here we're just setting the name of the project. So when you do actually come to create a new project, it's going to ask you on the interface or console, it's going to ask you to choose a unique name for your new SageMaker project or your new model. And all this is saying is just try it. You'll actually need to align whatever name you choose to this string value here. Okay. So once you've created your SageMaker project, then this is just going to grab some of the environment variables. As I said, some things like network and subnets and securities. Here it's actually showing you that it's going to need the data bucket, so the place where your input data is going to be located, so your source for your training data. And then a model bucket, so once you have trained your model, then where do you want the model to be stored? Then you've got S3 KMS key, EBS KMS key. So KMS is key management service, and that is for encryption, really. So just to make sure that your data is encrypted while it's stored on S3, and then encrypted data while it's stored on EBS. So EBS is Elastic Block Storage, I believe. And then lastly is the pipeline execution role. So the pipeline execution role is basically the role that you want your pipeline to assume while it's executing and going through your pipeline. All right, so here it's just actually calling the function. So this is just highlighting the environment variables that we will need. Then this is calling the function that was defined up here and actually get the environment variables. And then this last line is just printing out the environment variables that were retrieved, just for informational purposes. Okay, so once you've got the environment variables, then down here is okay, here it's going through the environment data. So it's grabbing all the results that was grabbed from the environment variables and then storing them as individual key strings. So you've got region, you've got pipeline role, processing role, training role. So you might have different permissions for each of the different types of jobs. So your pipeline is the service or resource that's going to be orchestrating your SageMaker pipeline process from input data to built model. And then you've got some other processing role and training role. So those are the roles that you're going to assign your SageMaker processing jobs and your SageMaker training jobs. Then you've got your data bucket, your model bucket, and again, all those keys. Okay, then here for some reason they're printing out the version of SageMaker again, and then just printing out the region. Then we're also selecting a model package group name. So when you go through this whole process of building out a new model, you're going to probably be building out this model multiple times. So you won't always get the model to be accurate on the first time or the second time. You might get on the third time, and over time you might be improving the accuracy of that model. So the model package group name is just there to be a container for all the different model versions that you have and just to group it all together. Okay, then we've got the pipeline name. So the pipeline name is the SageMaker pipeline, and it's just there to, again, orchestrate the whole workflow. Okay, so we'll just go through. It's actually just importing a whole bunch of things. This OS is just to access the operating system environment. So even though we're using SageMaker pipelines, at each step, for the most part, it will spin up some sort of virtual machine, and you might need access to the operating system. Anyway, then it's actually importing a whole bunch of different things. So you've got SageMaker Estimator to actually train your model, inputs for the input data, model metrics to determine the accuracy of the data, SageMaker processing, so that's to just manage the feature creation and feature engineering. They are using sklearn processing, so that's the engine that they're going to be using for the feature engineering. They're also going to be using some conditions. So in the previous session, I mentioned that there's a conditional statement at the very end where it'll check whether or not the MSE value is below or equal to a value of 6. So that's what this thing is doing, just importing that class object. Then you've got conditional steps, so that's for the thing that I just mentioned above. You've got things for parameters, and you've got the SageMaker pipeline itself, and multiple steps. So if you go back to here, so this whole gray box, you can think of that as the whole SageMaker pipeline. Then if you think about these few steps in the middle, you can think of each of these as an action. So you've got input, output, and that goes input, output. So here the first action is your SageMaker processing job to generate your features, and then that is the output saved, and then that becomes the input to your SageMaker training job, and then that outputs the trained models, and then you've got another action which is the SageMaker evaluation job, and that will take the test data and the trained model and then evaluate it and then save the reports, and then the last thing is the registering of the model. Okay, so these things in the center, you can think of them as actions or activities that need to be done, and they have been placed in this whole end-to-end SageMaker pipeline in individual sequence. They've been sequenced accordingly, and these are various steps. So this is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Okay, so I just wanted to cover that. So that's why we're importing steps. So the whole gray box was the pipeline, and you've got steps. So the main things is we've got a processing step and we've got a training step. And then we've also got a register model, and we've got network config because we're going to have a closed off VPC environment. Okay, then we've got a reference to the base directory where all of the, I guess, application code will be stored. So pipelines. So if we go to here, I believe, so that's where this file is stored. It's over here. And then looking at pipelines, abalone, and you've got your evaluate pipeline, and you've got your process here. Okay, I won't actually go through any of that code. Then we've got a whole bunch of parameters here. So you've got a parameter to define the number of instances that you're going to have available while you're performing your processing job. So in this instance, probably going to set to 1. Then you've got the instance type for your processing job. So that's a ML-M5 extra large. And then your training job, it's going to be set to the same. It doesn't have to be the same. You can set it to whatever you want. There are different options. So if you follow the link, so let's say go to training, you can see at the moment we've got, you know, we've selected this one. So that has 4 cores, 16 gigs, and that's 23 cents an hour. Now, if you had a pretty big job to run, you might want to up that to a more powerful system. So you can bump that up all the way up to 96 and 384 gigs, or you can use accelerated computing. So these are GPU enhanced instances. So you can do this. So this is vertical scaling. So if you want to increase the power of the individual nodes, the other option is you can increase the number of nodes itself. So remember at the very beginning, I said we've got 1 instance. You can increase this to as many as you like, really, 2, 3, 10, and scale accordingly and scale it horizontally. Okay, so that's that. That's the training instance. And then here we're just setting the default status of the model when it does get registered. Okay, and then the last thing is the input data. So where to find the input data for the model that we want to train. Then we've got the network configuration. Main pieces are security groups and subnets. We want to encrypt the inter-container traffic. So if you've only got 1 instance, then you're not going to have inter-containers. But if you have multiple, then the communication between those separate containers, you just want to make sure that they are encrypted. Enable network isolation. We're going to set this to false because we're going to actually rely on the VPC to constrain us. So the VPC is going to be a closed-off network. It's going to be already isolated. So we're just going to rely on the VPC settings. We're not going to have to isolate each container by themselves. Base job prefix. So it's just what you want to label each of your jobs. So in this process, we're going to be creating a SageMaker processing job, then a SageMaker training job, then a SageMaker evaluation job. So just for ease of use and so you can recognize which jobs are related to your work, you're going to prefix those jobs with a given name. Okay, so in this example, they're using sklearn processor to perform their feature engineering. So that's all the parameters here. You've got all the comments on the side if you want to read through those. And so once you've defined your job, so normally your job is defining, okay, what's the hardware resources that this is going to be run on, what's the operating system going to look like, and then where am I going to find the actual application code that you want me to run, and then what type of permissions is this job going to have while it's running, and also what's the network configurations. Okay, so once you've defined your job, then you're going to want to add that job into the pipeline. And what is known as a step per se is kind of like a wrapper. So your first step is going to be like a placeholder, and then we're going to place this job in that first step. So that's what this is. Okay. So what's this? That's the processing step. So we're going to have, at the end of it, we're going to have our training data, validation data, and our testing data. Then we're going to start on our model training process. So first thing is we're defining the S3 location of where we want to store the trained model outputs. We're going to be using XGBoost in this example. And all this line is doing is this specific location, this SageMaker URIs actually contains a reference or library of all of the built-in SageMaker images that need to be loaded. Right, so you choose the algorithm. So in this case, we're going to choose XGBoost, and you need to know what image to load. So let's just say it's kind of like an operating system. It's kind of like saying, I want Windows, and I want Windows to be loaded with the XGBoost software, and then I'm going to use that to train my model. So that's what that's saying. Then we're going to basically define the training job itself. We're going to use the estimator object, and here we're passing in the image URL. So basically, again, the image of the machine or algorithm, setting the instance type. So that was the M5 or the M5 extra large instance type. We're going to have one instance, setting the output model path, and then all the other things like the role, network configuration, and encryptions and KMS keys. Okay. Then we're going to set the hyperparameters. So these are specific to XGBoost. So whatever XGBoost requires, we're going to set them, and any other optional ones. And then once all of that's done, then we've defined our SageMaker training job. We've defined the parameters that we're going to be using with XGBoost algorithm. Then we can make a reference to that job as a new step. So we're going to call this training step. And again, we're going to be passing in some of these, attributes. So if you go back to this diagram, where is it? Here. You can see that we've got a SageMaker processing job that outputs train, test, validate into S3. But those S3 files are now going to form inputs to the following. So you've got SageMaker training job, and you've got train, validate. Okay, you've got train and validate, so that's the next job. So that's why the, outputs is going to form the input of this job. Okay, so once that's done, then we're going to create another job, and this is using the script processor. Now we didn't actually need to use the script processor. You could have used other frameworks. You could have used sklearn processor or PySpark processor, but anyway, for this worked example, they used script processor. They're using the Python 3 command, and they're going to be calling the this evaluate.py file. So here, again, you just need to set the image that you want to load into this step. You're going to need to set your instance type, how many instances, a name for that job itself, the permissions, and network configurations and encryption. Then you're going to need to set a evaluation report. So this evaluation report is just going to contain all of the results of your evaluation. So your evaluation is up here. This is where you're defining your evaluation step. So let's just go back to this diagram. So at the moment, we're up to this stage. We've defined the processing job, we've defined the training job, and we're now at the evaluation job where we're inputting the model and inputting the test data, and we're going to get out some results. So results.json. So we go back to here, and well, actually they called it evaluation.json. So that's what we're going to be getting out of this evaluation job. It's going to be some sort of model metrics, basically. Okay, so we've defined our job, we've defined the report placeholder, and then we're going to put that into a SageMaker processing step, again, like the very first step. And this time we're going to use some of the, again, we're using the output. So the test data from the previous step, which was, I don't know, which was the processing, that's right. So the SageMaker processing step, which was the feature engineering, where we split the input file into 3 separate files. So one of those files is now going to form one of the inputs to this evaluation step. And then also we are going to grab, when we look at the training step, we're going to grab the model artifacts that was generated from the training step, the train model itself. Okay, so with those 2 files, so the train model, and then we've got our new test data file, we want to run this Python code, evaluate.py. We're going to output that report, and that output report is going to be in this format. And then this is actually going to be used in the conditional statement at the next stage. Okay, so you got, what do you got? This is probably not important. Okay, here they are just setting up the stage of registering the model. So before we get to this, we're going to check whether or not the accuracy of the model is basically accurate, or it meets a specific threshold. And as I mentioned previously, they actually check the MSE for a value of 6 or lower, and if it's lower, then they register the model. So in this model registry process, they just define the name of the model, the estimator. Okay, so they actually just make a reference to the training job that was run. And then they define, what's this? The model data. So this is the train model, that tar.gz file. And then it also sets the content types. So this is the input data types. And here we're just using CSVs, and the response. So the scores or the outputs, the inferences from the model, and that's going to be a CSV. Then you also set the instance types. So these are basically defining what are the machine learning model instance types which are compatible with this trained model. So if you trained this without using, let's say, GPU accelerated instances, then you're probably not going to have that option. You're not going to be able to use these models, this trained model on accelerated GPU instances. Okay. Then you've got your transform instances. So this, again, it's outlining what are the compatible instance types for when you want to do batch transforms. So the first one was for inference. So this is for when you want to deploy an endpoint and you want to do real-time inferencing using your model. The second one is for transform, is when you have a big CSV of million or so records, and you just want to pass it through some sort of transform job, and then that transform job will just simply load up your trained model and algorithm read in your CSV file, and then just run the whole thing and in a batch form. Okay, then you've got your your model package group name. So again, you're going to have many versions of your models. Your first one might be good, your second one might not be good, third one might be okay, fourth one might be okay. So you just want to, I guess, store the accuracy of each of your models. What was the input, what was the related jobs, what was the weights, all those kind of things. You want to store those all together because they're all kind of trying to model the same sort of objective. Okay, and then when you register your model, you want to know how accurate your model is also. So you've got your model metrics loaded in. And then also the network configurations. Okay, this bit, not sure why it's there. I think this is just going to print out the VPC configuration, so it's not actually needed. And then we get to this bit where we are outlining the conditional statement. So this is just saying we want a new conditional statement where something is less than or equal to something else. And then you just define the left and right sides of your condition statement. So this is your conditional statement, so it's kind of representing this a little bit. Then you've got your left, which is representing this side, and then you've got your right representing this side. So basically it's saying that for the left, for this side, go get the evaluation report and actually go get the regression metrics MSE value and then plonk that here. And then on the right side, just put a value of 6. So it will just evaluate that criteria where your MSE value here on the left, whether or not it's smaller than or equal to the value on the right, which is 6 in this case. Okay, so when we've got that conditional statement, then we're going to add that to the whole workflow. And so to add that to the workflow, again, it's another step, and this is a condition step, and we're just going to name it something, and then we are going to add that condition into this step here. So you can see it's cond LTE here, which is referencing this object here. Okay, and then this last bit is, okay, so if this step is true, so if this condition statement is true, then it's going to run this next step. So that step is step register, which was created, was it created up here? I can't remember where it was. But all it's doing is it's registering your model into the SageMaker model registry. And then if it's false, so if it's not accurate enough, then don't bother doing anything and just stop the whole process. Okay? The last bit is, okay, we've been defining all of our activities or all of our actions that we want to do. We've also defined, as part of that, we've defined the infrastructure, so the instance types for each of them. For each of the steps, we've been defining the environments, so the images or the operating systems that we need for each of the steps. And we've also been linking out each of the code. Now, once we've got all those, we've got all these separate steps, but we now need something to bring it all together, and that's where we've got a pipeline. So we create a new instance of a pipeline. We just call the pipeline something. That string value is actually at the very beginning, which is here, pipeline, and then the project name. And then here we are just setting the parameters. So these are environment variables for the pipeline itself. So we're just going to feed in the instance type, instance count, instance type for training, the default model approval status, and the input data. So where can I find that input data? Then the last bit is steps. So these are the steps that we need to run in a sequence. So here, step process, so that's the SageMaker processing job, then the training job, evaluation job, then the conditional statement. Okay. This is just assigning the permissions to the pipeline, and then this is just printing out the complete pipeline definition. So again, we've defined all the actions, we've defined the steps, we've put it all together into one pipeline, and that whole pipeline is actually defined as pipeline domain specific language, and it's actually JSON syntax. So you can print it out and see what it's looking like there. Then this last bit is the process of starting the pipeline. So you've created the pipeline all above, and then you can start the pipeline. So that's running the whole process from start to finish. So going through input data, pulling it all in, feature engineering, splitting your data up, training your model, evaluating your model, then assessing whether or not your model is actually accurate, and then subsequently registering your model. This describe will just simply print out metadata relating to your pipeline, and then wait is it just actually waits till the pipeline has actually commenced. And then at the bottom, you just have a bit of cleanup code. So this is if you want to delete your pipeline or delete your SageMaker project, it will actually delete everything. So everything, the entry or project in SageMaker, it would delete all your templates, all your resources, all your buckets, pretty much everything. And then this last bit is just to empty out your S3 bucket, your kind of like working area. And then this last bit is just to delete or shut down any SageMaker Studio resources. So you can do this in the interface, or you can do it this way. Okay, and that was it for the code explanation. So this was only for the very first pipeline. So this is only to take your raw data, process it into your training, test, and validate data sets, train your model, have your trained model, evaluate your trained model, and then have a report, and then you're going to review the report, see whether or not the report says the model is accurate or not. If it's accurate, then register it. If it's not accurate, then just bin it. And then that's where it's going to stop. You're going to end up with a whole bunch of these trained models, which is going to be stored in S3, but they're all going to be registered in the SageMaker model registry. And then what's going to happen after is there's going to be a subsequent pipeline that looks and reviews all of your registered models, and then approves or declines these models. And the ones that do get approved will probably get promoted and deployed into production for production usage. All right, that's it. Thanks.